Nearly 4 years after Takeoff was killed, his trial finally has a date, but a forensic lab scandal is casting a shadow over the case. Nearly 4 years after a member of one of hip-hop's biggest groups was gunned down at a Houston bowling alley, his accused killer finally has a trial date. But as that date approaches, the case has been shadowed by something nobody saw coming, a forensic lab scandal that reaches into hundreds of unrelated cases across the city. Before we go further, Patrick Xavier Clark has pleaded not guilty and is presumed innocent under the law. Everything here comes from Harris County court filings, the Houston Forensic Science Center's own statements, and reporting from Click 2 Houston, ABC 13, and Fox 26. We'll use alleged accused and prosecutors say throughout, because that's exactly what these are. Nothing here is a verdict. Kirsnick Khari Ball was known to the world as Takeoff, one-third of the Migos, the Atlanta group that helped define a decade of hip-hop alongside his uncle Quavo and his cousin Offset. Migos broke through with Versace, then hit #1 with Bad and Bougie in 2016, and built a trilogy of albums called Culture that topped the charts. Takeoff himself was known in the industry as the quiet one, more private than his groupmates, respected for his flow more than his headlines. In 2018, he stepped out with his own solo album, The Last Rocket. On November 1st, 2022, Takeoff was at a private party at 810 Billiards and Bowling in downtown Houston with his uncle and groupmate Quavo among the guests. The party wound down around 1 in the morning, but a crowd lingered outside the venue for almost 2 more hours. Prosecutors say the trouble started over a high-stakes dice game inside the venue. An argument broke out between other people at the party, tempers escalated, and it spilled outside onto the sidewalk. Here's what matters, and is the detail that makes this case sting. By every account, Takeoff wasn't playing dice, wasn't part of the argument, and wasn't armed. He was simply standing nearby, among friends, when it turned violent. Around 2:40 in the morning, shots were fired from at least 2 different weapons. Takeoff was struck in the head and torso. He was pronounced dead at the scene. A woman and a man nearby were also hurt. Both survived. Houston police opened a homicide investigation into a shooting with a large painted crowd. Multiple shooters alleged, and initially no one in custody. News of Takeoff's death spread fast. Quavo, who had been with him that night, and Offset, his cousin and groupmate, both posted raw, grief-stricken tributes in the days after. Offset wrote that his heart was shattered and that reality felt like a nightmare. Artists across the industry called it a gut punch, another young voice in hip-hop gone too soon. Within days, 22-year-old Cameron Joshua was taken into custody, charged with 2 counts of being a felon in possession of a weapon. Police were clear from the start. Joshua wasn't accused of firing the shot that killed Takeoff. About a month after the shooting, in December of 2022, 36-year-old Patrick Xavier Clark was arrested and charged with murder. In May of 2023, a Harris County grand jury formally indicted Clark on the murder charge, setting the case on the long road toward trial. According to reporting on the case, prosecutors point to surveillance footage from that night allegedly showing Clark with a gun, along with his fingerprints found on a wine bottle recovered at the scene. That physical evidence, not any DNA work, is what prosecutors are expected to lean on most heavily at trial. In December of 2023, the weapons charges against Cameron Joshua were dismissed. Clark remains the only person charged in connection with Takeoff's death. What followed was years of postponed hearings and pushback dates, common in complex murder cases but agonizing for a family still waiting for a trial. As recently as December of 2025, a scheduled hearing was pushed to a pretrial conference in January of 2026. Somewhere in that stretch of time, a name most people had never heard entered the case file, Rochelle Austen, a forensic analyst at the Houston Forensic Science Center since 2019, who had worked on evidence connected to Clark's case. A quick legal note. A Brady Notice is a formal disclosure prosecutors are required to make to the defense anytime something emerges that could affect a witness's credibility, evidence in the case, or a defendant's right to a fair trial. It's not an accusation of guilt or innocence, it's a disclosure obligation. In March of 2024, a colleague caught a problem, a chain of custody mix-up on one of Austin's routine proficiency tests, the internal checks labs use to make sure analysts are still doing accurate work. It turned out Austin had skipped a verification step and processed the wrong sample. The Houston Forensic Science Center was direct about one thing in its own statement. Those proficiency tests don't involve real case evidence. Austin's documented errors were on internal test samples, not, as far as has been reported, on the actual evidence in Takeoff's case. Even so, the lab terminated Austin on March 25, 2024, citing an inability to produce quality work, missed production goals, and a lack of attention to detail. Because Austin had touched hundreds of cases over 5 years, her firing triggered Brady Notices in 392 pending criminal cases, including Clark's. The Houston Forensic Science Center says her failed proficiency test ultimately led it to scrutinize her work across roughly 550 cases in total, informing every defense attorney involved that the analysts who worked on their case had failed internal quality checks. Reporting has tied Austin's work to other high-profile cases too, including blood evidence in the A.J. Armstrong murder retrial, showing how far one analyst's failed test can ripple through a court system. Here's an open question, not a fact. Prosecutors haven't alleged that Austen mishandled the specific evidence against Clark, the surveillance video, and the fingerprint. But defense attorneys can now raise her record in front of a jury to argue the lab's work in general can't be fully trusted, even on evidence she never personally touched. Whether that argument actually moves a jury in a case that doesn't appear to rely on her lab work at all is something only the trial itself will answer. In March of 2026, Clark brought on a high-profile defense team assigned his side is preparing to make the most of every opening the case affords, forensic questions included. It's worth asking why a single murder case has stayed in the news for nearly 4 years. Part of it is who Takeoff was, a member of one of the defining groups of modern hip-hop. Part of it is how long the wait for trial has dragged on for his family. And now, part of it is a forensic scandal that has nothing to do with the shooting itself, but everything to do with whether the public can trust the evidence a courtroom relies on. In February of 2026, after years of delay, a trial date was set, jury selection beginning November 5th, with the trial itself starting November 9th, 2026, nearly 4 years after Takeoff was killed. 3 months after the shooting, at the 2023 Grammy Awards, Quavo took the stage alone during the In Memoriam segment to perform Without You, a song he wrote for his nephew after his death. He held Takeoff's chain in the air as the performance closed. It remains one of the most talked about tribute moments in Grammy history. Kirsnick Khari Ball was 28 years old. To millions of fans, he was Takeoff of the Migos, 1/3 of a group that helped define a decade of hip-hop. To his family, he was a son, a nephew, a cousin, still waiting, nearly 4 years later, for a jury to hear this case. Rest in peace, Takeoff. When jury selection begins in November, will the forensic questions swirling around this case actually shape the outcome, or will they turn out to be a footnote next to the surveillance footage and the fingerprint? We'll be following it. This has been Crimetown TV. We'll keep following this case as it heads to trial. Rest in peace, Takeoff. This has been Crimetown TV.